On the day of my wedding, my parents suddenly show up at my house with my fiancé, Yosef Caldwell. They say they've decided the bride is going to change. Your sister's terminally ill, and her only wish is to marry Yosef. You're her younger sister, so be generous and help her out. Yosef chimes in calmly, don't worry, it's just a ceremony. Once she passes, you and I can still get the marriage certificate. When I refuse, my parents tie me up. We'll let you out once the wedding's over. But not long after they leave, an intruder breaks in and brutally murders me. By the time they finally remember me, all that's left is my rotting corpse. My soul drifted in the air, coldly watching the wedding that was supposed to be mine take place. All eyes were focused on the center stage at the wedding venue. My sister, Sonia Quaid, dressed in the wedding gown meant for me, was saying heartfelt vows to my fiancé, Yosef Caldwell. Nia is finally happy now. My parents kept murmuring in the audience as their eyes reddened with emotion. Amid the crowd's cheers, the newlyweds beamed with happiness as they shared what they claimed were cherished memories. Romantic encounters? Deep affection? My presence was completely erased in their stories as if I had never existed. The wedding dress that once felt tight and constricting on me now looked like it was tailored perfectly for Sonia. I drifted in the air, growing colder and colder. So this was it. From the very beginning, I was never meant to be the person to marry Yosef today. That explained why Yosef had seemed so distracted during the wedding preparations. He was constantly smiling at his phone for no apparent reason. But what I couldn't understand was why they had to use me as the sacrifice if they loved Sonia so much. I died in a rented apartment not long ago. My parents had tied my hands tightly, leaving me immobile. All I could do was watch in terror as a masked assailant broke in. I was with child, but I was brutally assaulted and murdered. My death was horrific. The attacker slowly sliced open my wrists with a knife, letting my blood drain bit by bit. Before leaving, my parents had gagged me with a towel out of fear that I'd cry out for help. I couldn't even whimper when I died. Ever since I was little, my parents had always favored Sonia. The snacks we both loved? I never got any. The dress I longed for? Always bought for Sonia instead. When we grew up and there wasn't enough money to send both of us to college, my parents didn't hesitate to give the tuition to Sonia. They told me to earn mine through part-time jobs. But I never could have imagined that they would be so biased as to ask me to give up my fiancé for Sonia when she told them she had cancer and didn't have long to live. What shattered me even more was that Yosef, the man who had been with me since college, also betrayed me. I watched coldly as this farcical wedding came to its perfect conclusion. When they packed up and prepared to leave for their honeymoon, I followed them once again. On the beaches of Anoli, Yosef and Sonia walked hand in hand along the shore, bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun. The warm sunlight spilled over them, and the sea breeze gently tousled their hair. As Sonia affectionately wrapped her arms around Yosef's neck, the two shared a passionate kiss. Passers-by looked on with envy, clapping and cheering for the couple. Even my usually conservative parents stood by, cheering them on. At this moment, no one would remember me, the one abandoned in a rented apartment. Who would even care whether what they did to me was fair or not? Yosef, do you think Freya is mad at me? She still hasn't called. Sonia leaned weakly into Yosef's arms, feigning frailty as she asked. How could she be? She's your sister, and you're seriously ill now. This is your only wish. She's not an unreasonable person. At worst, we'll just make it up to her later. Yosef gently comforted her. Sonia nodded before quickly perking up and excitedly pulling Yosef and my parents out to dinner. My parents couldn't fully enjoy the seafood dinner costing tens of thousands of dollars. Sonia, on the other hand, acted as if it were all completely justified. After dinner, I followed them back to the hotel. Yosef turned down the nightgown-clad Sonia's flirtatious attempt and went to the balcony alone, silently smoking as he remained deep in thought. I turned and drifted toward my parents' room. My parents hadn't gone to bed yet. They were probably still upset about the expensive dinner. They sat on the bed, shaking their heads and sighing repeatedly. My mother then took out her phone and tried calling me, only to find that my phone was switched off. Their expressions instantly darkened further. From what they were used to, every past argument had ended the same way, a slap followed by a sweet treat. Their making the first move and calling me was considered their way of offering me a way out and blowing everything over. This was always their approach. But this time, no one would ever pick up the phone again. David, judging by the way Nia spends money, she probably hasn't saved much. For retirement, we'll still have to count on Freya. But she didn't answer our call just now. Do you think she's holding a grudge against us? Mom asked, looking at Dad with worry all over her face. My dad took a drag of his cigarette, then snorted coldly and said firmly, we're her biological parents. Also, since her sister isn't well, so it's only right that she gives way to her. What right does she have to be angry? I sat quietly in the corner, expressionless as I stared at them with nothing but irony. At that moment, I actually felt a strange sense of relief that I had died. Half a month later, they returned home from their sweet honeymoon. Sonia wore my pajamas and sprawled boldly on the bed meant to be my marital bed. She looked every bit like the lady of the house. Meanwhile, Yosef glanced around the room, as if searching for traces of me. But after looking around, he suddenly realized that there was no sign that I had ever existed in this home recently. He stood blankly at the door of the study where I used to spend most of my time. Yosef, I'm your wife. I don't want things from another woman cluttering our home, Sonia said sweetly, her smooth arms draping over Yosef's chest. I bought a lot of new clothes. Why don't we turn this study into a walk-in closet? That sugary voice was like a tiny hook, tugging at Yosef's heartstrings. However, Yosef gently pushed her hands away, keeping a bit of distance. He looked conflicted. Nia, Freya is still my wife. I only did this to fulfill your last wish. About this study, could we maybe? No. Sonia immediately cut him off, eyes welling with tears. She looked both coquettish and stubborn. I'm your rightful wife now. You're not allowed to have anyone else in your heart. In the end, Yosef gave in and agreed to turn my study into Sonia's walk-in closet. Put that over there. Throw that out. Throw that one out, too. In the study, Sonia directed the workers as they removed my belongings one by one. Yosef stood silently off to the side, watching everything without saying a word. He clearly remembered how I'd told him, time and time again, that my biggest dream since childhood was to have a study of my own. Yosef clearly knew how biased my parents were. He knew the unfair treatment I suffered as a child, and he knew how desperately I wanted him to choose me with certainty. And yet now, he had completely casted me aside because he was determined to be Sonia's savior. This study held so much of my hard work and dreams. Every moment of success still echoed in my mind. But now, it was disappearing bit by bit as it was being slowly devoured. Soon, the study ceased to exist and was replaced by a brand new walk-in closet just like my life, which was gradually being overtaken by Sonia. A small photo of me was left behind in the corner of the study. Upon seeing that, Yosef quietly walked over, picked it up, and carefully placed it into his wallet. Back at the office, an employee told Yosef that I hadn't come to work for several days and hadn't submitted a single design draft for the signed project. Yosef's expression immediately darkened with fury. He pulled out his phone and angrily tried to call me, only for the calls to go unanswered. He lost his temper in front of his employees for the first time. He suddenly stood up and swept all the documents off his desk. Ultimately, he fired me for unexplained absenteeism and appointed Sonia, who had never studied design, to take my position. At the office, Yosef eventually gave in to Sonia's seduction. They held each other tightly, kissing passionately like a couple madly in love. They were tangled together on the desk and the chair. I stood to the side, watching as a strong wave of nausea rose in my chest. I subconsciously touched my belly, feeling a deep sense of worthlessness. I was 1 month pregnant. I had planned to surprise Yosef, but now, both my unborn child and I had ended up dead. Over the following days, Yosef, like a lunatic, sent message after message asking where I was. Perhaps he'd sobered up from the thrill of the affair. His tone in every message was humble, pleading for me to come back. But how could I possibly reply to him? Honey, what are you thinking about? At some point, Sonia had walked over. With her radiant, glowing face, she didn't look like someone suffering from a terminal illness. Yet, Yosef seemed blind to it all. Upon hearing Sonia's voice, Yosef panicked like he'd been caught doing something wrong. He hurriedly exited our chat. When he turned around and raised his hand to embrace Sonia, he suddenly noticed the necklace around her neck. Isn't that Freya's necklace? Why do you have it? He asked. Huh? Really? What a coincidence. I saw it online and bought it because I liked it. Yosef frowned. That was a necklace he had given me in college. It wasn't expensive, but I always wore it and never took it off. A flicker of panic flashed in Sonia's eyes, and she quickly changed the subject. Honey, we have to celebrate the pregnancy today. My parents have already made dinner and are waiting at home. Let's go, okay? As I watched their backs as they walked away, I instinctively reached for my bare neck. That necklace had been taken by the attacker after I died. And now, an identical necklace was on Sonia's neck. How could I possibly believe it was just a coincidence? Could my death have something to do with Sonia? Yosef, Nia is risking her life to bear you a child. You'd better treat the child well. You have to be good to Nia. At the dinner table, my parents teared up at the sight of Sonia's slightly thinner face.